Hey everyone, it's time to talk about Brewmaster Monk in the War Within. As we've talked about in the other tank videos, we're going to talk about the changes that are happening for Monk going from Dragonflight into the War Within. We're going to talk about the talents, both the class tree and the spec tree. We'll talk about the hero talents, both options that you have available, Master of Harmony and Shado-Pan as a Brewmaster. And then we'll talk about the tier set, and lastly we'll talk about how the spec overall feels to play and how my experience with it has been so far in the testing that I've done. Overall, the actual playstyle of Monk is going to feel pretty familiar to you if you played it before. You still have your key abilities in Keg Smash and Tiger Palm that spend energy that give you cooldown reduction on your brews. You have Blackout Kick that you will want to be using to maintain shuffle on cooldown. You have Breath of Fire, which provides a dot to targets that you have Keg Smash that you will want to keep up at all times. You also have Rising Sun Kick, which does a truckload of damage, and these weave together nicely rotationally, and with the removal of some of the other active abilities, especially damage and cooldowns, that we'll talk about when we get to the talent trees, the spec overall feels really good to play, and there's a lot less tension that exists within the spec. You also still have Spinning Crane Kick for AoE situations, and then your normal slew of mobility and utility abilities that monks come with. Well, there have been some changes to the baseline toolkit, and there have been many changes to the talent tree, and that's where we want to spend a lot of our time talking in this video. I'm not going to give an exhaustive list of every change that's been made to the talent tree. As you can see on screen, this looks very, very different from what we have in Dragonflight. But we'll talk about kind of the key highlights, the most important talents that you're going to be using all the time, and some utility options that you have that you can flex around with. We'll talk about both the class and the spec tree because, again, both have received pretty significant changes. So starting with the class tree, as a Brewmaster, you will always have Paralysis and Rising Sun Kick. These have been given to you baseline. They don't cost any talent points. So they're kind of the parts of the tree that you start from. Important utility that are very easy to grab: Tiger's Lust, Detox, and Spear Hand Strike. This is your interrupt, your cleanse, and your sprint / Blessing of Freedom that you can use on yourself or others. These are very easy talent points to get near the top of the tree. You will notice on the left side of the tree, Improved Roll has been removed. This talent is not Improved Roll. This is Bounding Agility, which gives you a little bit more distance on your rolls. You baseline have 2 charges of roll now. You don't have to spend a talent point to get that second charge back, so that's a really good change. You can still pick up Celerity, which gives you a 3rd charge and cooldown reduction on roll. And in addition to that, there's another talent that interacts with roll all the way at the bottom in the capstone area called Lighter Than Air, and this allows you to do a little dash after you execute a roll. And I'll show you what that looks like real quick here. So after you roll, in any direction you want to, you can just double jump and you get this little dash forward. One of the cool things you can do about this, it's a little hard to show off in the dungeon here, but if you are falling, you can roll and then double jump to reset your fall distance and avoid falling damage if you time it correctly. Other movement abilities, Transcendence is still around. In addition to that, Clash is now in the class tree and is actually pretty easy to get to in the capstone area. You'll notice there are some significant changes to the capstone area that we'll talk about as we dive a little bit deeper into the tree here. But you can pretty easily access the full toolkit of movement that Brewmaster and Monk in general have had historically, a lot of which were moved to talents that were hard to pick up in Dragonflight. They're now a lot easier to pick up in the War Within, and overall I think this feels fantastic. Monk feels like Monk again in a way that it just kind of felt like something was missing in Dragonflight. As far as your other utility abilities, Ring of Peace is still here in the talent tree. Very easy to pick up and one of the best utility abilities in the game when it can be used. Leg Sweep is baseline. We already talked about Paralysis being baseline. There is another talent here, Pressure Points, which causes Paralysis to have an Enrage remove. This is a really cool, potentially, I guess, option that you can pick up. Paralysis does have a much longer cooldown than most other soothes. I think the baseline cooldown for a soothe is usually about 10 seconds, at least for Hunter and Druid. I know Shiv is longer than that, and then the Evoker one, who knows how long that is, it depends on how many targets they soothe. Soothes in general, with the recent removal of Raging, may be less impactful, but there are still going to be certain mobs in dungeons that have an Enrage effect, and being able to dispel that for yourself as the tank is always a really, really nice thing to have. As far as the buttons you're going to be using, you will see that Chi Wave has been redesigned. It is now a passive ability that is cast when you use your Rising Sun Kick. This is a really nice way to reduce button bloat. it does come at a little bit of a cost. Chi Wave was one of the best ways that we could do ranged pulls of packs as a monk. And while there is still the option of Crackling Jade Lightning, that being a channeled ability that uses energy feels very awkward compared to Chi Wave, which we could just kind of tap and then wait for everything to come to us. You can still take Chi Burst, which does a truckload of damage. However, there are always kind of awkward issues with using a cast time ability while actively tanking things. This could be something you use as a tool to round up and pull mobs, but I think the way that Chi Wave is redesigned is really nice. As far as defensive abilities, we still have access to Diffuse Magic, Fortifying Brew, and Dampen Harm. These are all really easy to pick up, and the fact that we can still have Diffuse Magic and Dampen Harm, which we can get at the same time in Dragonflight, but for the entire history of the monk class before that, we had to choose one or the other. Getting both of these in the same build really fills a hole in the monk class that has existed for a long time with regard to defensive abilities. If you don't want to hit these, or if you feel like it's a little bit too much, you're still learning how to tank or learning the class, there are passive options in place of Dampen Harm and Diffuse Magic that both work just fine and will give you good, solid baseline defense. But these active abilities, I would encourage you to learn how to use, because these are some of the more powerful active tank cooldowns that are available on short cooldowns in the entire game. Lastly, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the capstone area, which has been completely redesigned almost from the ground up. You'll notice that we still have access to Summon Black Ox statue, but there is no more White Tiger statue down here, and there's no more Jade Serpent statue. Those have been taken out of the general tree, and they are now specific options for each of the specs. We can pick up Windwalking a lot easier than we could in previous builds if you want to bring that utility. There are still two 2-point talent nodes down here. There's one more 2-point talent node in the tree up here that I think you'll probably not usually take both points in, but there's two here that give, I think, incredibly good value for 2 talent points, getting 4% physical damage done and 4% avoidance, and on the other side getting 4% magical damage done and 4% healing is pretty good value compared to 2-point talent nodes in other class trees. In addition to that, I think these are just good points to spend in the capstone area. Bounce Back is a good talent when a hit deals more than 12% of your maximum health. You reduce all damage taken by 20% for 4 seconds. This is going to have pretty high uptime compared to the possible uptime that it can have. Fatal Touch is a button that you can take that reduces the cooldown of Touch of Death by 90 seconds. This is going to be really, really good in dungeons. It also causes Touch of Death to increase your damage for 30 seconds. So this is a good way to get a mob finished off, which when you use Touch of Death, it clears pretty much your entire stagger bar, and then get a nice little damage buff heading into the next pack. And then there's some other cool options down here that you can take a look at that I don't want to spend too much time talking about right now. This is kind of the build that I've been running with for the most part, and I found it very useful and very easy to work with compared to previous iterations of monk class trees. Moving over to the spec tree, you'll notice that a few major changes have been made. First of all, the Ox talents have been moved up and are no longer in a place where you feel like you have to path through them to pick up some other important talents. So if you don't want to play with, as the community affectionately calls him, Angry Dave, you don't have to anymore. You can completely ignore these 3 talents and choose other ones. In addition to that, Bone Dust Brew is gone. This is a big change. Bone Dust Brew was a big damage ability that we had in Shadowlands, obviously, if you were playing Necrolord Monk, but it kind of felt out of place in the toolkit. It gave an extra ability that was really hard to weave in and made setting up the proper burst combination really cumbersome. So I'm kind of happy that it's gone, and it's been replaced by Ox Stance. This is a really strong baseline defensive ability. Casting Purifying Brew grants a charge of Ox Stance, increased based on your stagger level. When you take damage that's greater than 40% of your current health, not your maximum health, a charge is consumed to increase the amount you stagger. And then there's 2 talents down here that give this a little bit more oomph as well. Rising Sun Kick grants a charge of Ox Stance, and Ox Stance will now trigger when your target is lower than 40% of your current health. Baseline, I think it's 50%, and then this talent brings it down to 40, but I think you'll probably always want to run all 3 of these talents. This is just a really good way to ensure that as you're taking a big portion of whatever health percentage that you're at, you're going to be able to withstand even more damage coming in by staggering more and more of it. Weapons of Order is still a capstone talent with a couple of options to buff it. Down below here, I think you'll probably want to run Weapons of Order most of the time. You can definitely take Pressing Advantage if you want to simplify the rotation even more, because this does replace Tiger Palm. But I think having the agency to spend energy on Tiger Palm feels pretty good in the single target situation. I've played around with both Press the Advantage and Weapons of Order, and I think I would lean a little bit more towards playing with Weapons of Order. This may just be because I have a lot of experience playing Brewmaster Monk, and I'm very comfortable with the toolkit and the rotation, even when it was in its most bloated state. But I think either of these are viable options. You can pick to either have a very strong damage and defensive cooldown, or a very strong kind of baseline extra damage and defense ability as well. Exploding Keg is still here, but again, with the removal of Bone Dust Brew, setting up a big exploding keg is going to feel a lot less cumbersome than it did previously. In addition to that, Stormstout's last keg is a lot easier to get to. You don't have to path all the way down to the bottom of the tree. It's right here. And I think this is a talent that we're going to run with 100% of the times. You're either going to be taking Exploding Keg or taking the Ox talents to get to it. I would probably lean towards just taking Exploding Keg. A couple of other key changes that I want to talk about. Special Delivery is more viable right now on the beta compared to Rushing Jade Wind, which also helps a lot with the button bloat that Brewmaster kind of has inherent in its rotation. You know, if you're adding all these things up, we can take Special Delivery instead of Rushing Jade Wind. You can still definitely play Rushing Jade Wind, but Special Delivery is a much more viable alternative. We don't have Bone Dust Brew. We don't have the Tiger statue. The rotation, while still having more complexity than some of the other tanks and still having more keybinds required than most of the other tanks, is in a place where it feels a lot more manageable. Also, we don't have Chi Wave as an active ability if you've been using that. So there's just 4-ish less cooldowns that you have to use, which allows you to focus more on properly executing the normal rotation and also using your utility abilities in a way that makes it much more approachable to play Brewmaster Monk in a way that gives you very high damage. The last thing that I want to specifically highlight is that there's a new talent called Elixir of Determination. This says when you fall below 40% health, you gain an absorb for 100% of your recently purified damage, or a minimum of 20% of your maximum health. Cannot occur more than once every 15 seconds. This is a very strong talent. It's replacing Healing Elixir in the talent tree, and frankly, like, this is just a really good improvement. It's not exactly a cheat death compared to what a lot of other tanks have, but it gives you a little bit of extra survivability when you get low on health, which is when you're in danger. I don't think Monk needs a full cheat death compared to some of the toolkits that other tanks have available. Your incoming damage still feels incredibly smooth with stagger, and you're not really at risk of dying until you get to low health. And the fact that this talent, and also a lot of the time Ox Stance, will kick in when you get to low health just gives you an extra layer of security when you're in a more vulnerable position. Overall, I think the spec tree and the class tree are in a great state right now. Maybe not quite as clean and satisfying as the Blood Decay trees, but I think the rework that Monk has seen on the talent level is very positive, and I think the result is also very good in how it actually plays and in how it feels. Moving on to hero talents. Master of Harmony is the one that I have put more time into testing, and the one that has felt a lot more satisfying. And we'll talk about why as we kind of go through the different points on the tree here. So Master of Harmony is built around this ability called Aspect of Harmony, which stores vitality from 20% of your damage done and 10% of your effective healing, so not including overhealing. And then for 10 seconds after casting Celestial Brew, which again is your big shield that you're using rotationally pretty frequently, your spells and abilities draw upon the stored vitality to deal 25% additional damage over 8 seconds. This is kind of confusing to think about because you're storing 20% of your damage to deal 25% more damage as a dot. You can just think of this as you're going through your rotation, you have the opportunity to use Purifying Brew to give yourself extra damage when you want to have it, or just extra damage as you're using Celestial Brew defensively. The Capstone talent for Master of Harmony: when Aspect of Harmony deals damage, it has a chance to spread to a nearby enemy. When you directly attack an affected target, it has a chance to intensify. Targets damaged or healed by your Aspect of Harmony take 10% increased damage or healing from you. So basically, this just kind of levels up the baseline Aspect of Harmony, makes it quote-unquote intensify. I haven't looked into what that actually does yet, but basically it can either spread or it can become stronger. In addition to that, while you have that dot up, you are dealing 10% extra damage as well from all of your other abilities. Some of the other key additions in this hero talent tree are Endless Draft, which makes Celestial Brew have 1 additional charge. This is huge because it allows you to sit on 1 charge of Celestial Brew without feeling like you're wasting it for an extended period of time. I really like having a second charge of things. You get so much value going from 1 to 2 charges of an ability compared to going from like 2 to 3 or 3 to 4. Having that second charge of Celestial Brew feels fantastic in the actual gameplay. In addition to this, Overwhelming Force causes Rising Sun Kick, Blackout Kick, and Tiger Palm to deal 15% additional damage to targets in a line in front of you. This brings some really valuable AoE components to some of our single target rotational abilities. I don't think this will make Tiger Palm completely replace Spinning Crank Kick in big AoE scenarios, but it does make it feel a little bit better to press, and it does make Blackout Kick and Rising Sun Kick feel a lot better to press in those AoE scenarios as well. Overall, I have really enjoyed playing Master of Harmony. The dot that it gives does a significant amount of overall damage in addition to the other damage that it brings to the table. And having that second charge of Purifying Brew feels really good, and also just being able to choose when you're activating the extra damage portion of your hero talents feels really good. And that kind of segues into what I want to talk about with Shado-Pan, because I have found the Shado-Pan tree to be sadly disappointing compared to the Master of Harmony tree. Let's just talk about how the Shado-Pan tree is designed and kind of the inherent flaws in it that I hope we see some changes to before this thing goes live. Flurry Strikes. Basically, spending damage in relation to your attack power generates flurry charges, and then for every 400 energy you spend, you unleash all of your flurry charges, dealing physical damage for each charge. The problem here is you can only store up to 10 flurry strikes at a time. By the time you get to your 10th flurry stack, in my experience, I've usually spent 200 or less energy, which means that for half of the energy that you're spending to unleash your flurry strikes, you are wasting any further charges of flurry strikes that you gain. Now, this is potentially just a tuning thing. Maybe Blizzard can lower the energy threshold that we have to reach to actually spend that much, or maybe we are going to be allowed to stack up even more flurry strikes, but that's going to mess with some balancing on other parts of the tree that we'll talk to in a few moments. But overall, it just feels really bad seeing that 10 stack build up and then just hang around for a long time while you try to spend more energy to unleash those flurry strikes that you have built up by doing damage. In addition to that, once you finally spend your 400 energy to unleash these flurry strikes, they just don't feel like they do that much damage. 32,000 physical damage per charge may sound like a lot, but that's only 10 charges, which means this is doing like 326k physical damage total. Now some of that can crit. Let's say you have like a 40% crit chance, because crit's really good for Brewmaster, so maybe we're looking at like somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 physical damage. That sounds like a lot in Dragonflight numbers, but like one keg smash on multiple enemies is already going to do almost that much. So just the tuning of flurry strikes, both on how fast you build them up, how slowly you're able to spend them, and how much damage they do once they actually start landing, just feels incredibly underwhelming right now. Especially when you start to compare this to a lot of the other hero talent trees that other things have gotten, and even compared to Master of Harmony and just the control that this gives you over building and spending your extra damage. It's not all negative though. There are some cool things about this tree. If we look at the capstone talent Wisdom of the Wall, this basically, when you spend your flurry strikes, you have the chance to get some really nice buffs that can really help you be more effective with the other abilities that you're using. So let's look at what these buffs do. You get one of these buffs every time you use 10 flurry strikes, and they last for 20 seconds. It's going to take a lot longer than 20 seconds to build up and get another buff, so you're probably never going to be rolling multiple of these buffs at the same time. You have these following buffs. Critical strike damage is increased by 30%. Dodge and crit chance are increased by 25% of your versatility bonus. Flurry strikes deal a bunch of additional shadow damage to all uncontrolled enemies within 6 yards. And the effect of your mastery is increased by 25%. These are all pretty nice buffs. However, again, these are all kind of subject to the same problems that I highlighted with flurry strikes, where it just takes forever to actually get these things to go off, and you're wasting a lot of charges along the way. If you do enough damage to build up like 20 to 30 flurry strikes before you can actually get them off, those are all wasted, and then it feels like you're wasting the opportunity to get one of these buffs from Wisdom of the Wall as well. Now, the core mechanics of the spec have some problems, but it does do a couple of really cool things that I want to talk about here. First of all, this tree giga buffs the damage of Keg Smash. Efficient training right here causes all of your energy spenders, so Keg Smash, Tiger Palm, and Spinning Crane Kick, to deal an additional 15% damage, and then every 50 energy spent reduces the cooldown of weapons for order by 1 second. That's not going to get you a lot of cooldown reduction, but it is also giving you a lot of extra damage. And in addition to that, this talent 1 versus many causes Keg Smash damage to count as double towards Flurry Charge generation, and increases the damage of Keg Smash by 30%. So you're getting 2 really nice multipliers on Keg Smash's damage, which is just going to push its damage and therefore your threat absolutely through the roof. Flurry Strikes looks very underwhelming on the damage meters, but when you're playing Shado-Pan, Keg Smash ends up being a huge portion of your overall damage, like dwarfing everything else on the damage meters. In addition to that, there are some other cool hero talents on this tree that we need to talk about. Martial Precision gives you 10% armor penetration, which is pretty cool. Vigilant Watch gives you 20% additional crit damage on Blackout Kick. And then defensively, this one here, Predictive Training, whenever you dodge or parry, you reduce all damage taken by 10% for the next 6 seconds. When you're fighting Trash and Mythic Plus, you're going to have 100% uptime on this. You are dodging or parrying way more often than once every 6 seconds. So overall, some of the, I guess, quote-unquote minor talents within the Shado-Pan tree feel pretty nice, but the core mechanics of the tree are incredibly underwhelming, and honestly, I'm very disappointed in how this tree is now. The good news is, these are things that can be changed through some numbers tuning. This probably at this point does not need a full redesign from the ground up. If Blizzard makes it so that Flurry Strikes either are able to go to higher than 10 stacks, so you can just continue building them up while you wait for your energy to be spent, or if they dramatically lower the energy threshold that you need to reach to unleash these Flurry Strikes, I think this tree will feel pretty good to play in practice. Looking at the two of them, Master of Harmony is the one that I would play probably in all content right now if I were to main Brewmaster Monk. It just feels really good for the reasons that I said when talking about it, and overall, it's really nice to have a sense of control over when your damage is coming and when you're going to use it that a lot of the other specs don't quite offer. Moving on, let's talk about the tier set. Brewmaster Monk has one of the best designed tier sets out of any of the classes, not just tanks, out of any of the classes in Season 1 of the War Within. Let's look at what these bonuses do. Blackout Kick and Keg Smash deal 20% additional damage, and Shuffle also grants 3% damage reduction. Now, Blackout Kick and Keg Smash are your absolute bread and butter as a Brewmaster Monk. You want to be using these on cooldown all of the time, and so getting 20% more damage on them feels really good. Compare this to other tanks where they're maybe getting like a 10% damage increase on something, or just like a 5% overall damage. This is a really, really nice bonus. Shuffle is a buff that you have basically without using any mental energy at all. You're going to have 100% uptime on it. So yeah, getting that 3% damage with Shuffle is great. It means you're going to have 100% uptime whenever you are even in combat with anything. The 4 set, Blackout Kick increases your damage dealt by 1% for 15 seconds, stacking up to 3, and has a chance to reset the cooldown on Keg Smash and make its next cast cost no energy. This is an awesome set bonus. Getting a little bit of extra damage whenever you Blackout Kick, like you're gonna have permanent uptime on this 3% damage buff, but then also getting resets on Keg Smash, and this actually happens like noticeably often. I haven't like looked at the math on it or done the math on it, but this seems to happen like every 3 to 4 Blackout Kicks, which, you know, you're using every 4 seconds. So this happens really often, and getting extra Keg Smashes is huge for Brewmaster. Now, there is a little bit of negative interaction with this in the Shado-Pan talent tree. Because this makes those free Keg Smashes cost no energy, when you get those resets and use Keg Smash, that one is not going to count toward your energy spent to unleash your Flurry Strikes. This may be part of the problem in why it feels like it takes so long to spend your Flurry Strikes, but it does feel nice to get a free Keg Smash. In a season where most of the tier sets are underwhelming at best and almost irrelevant at worst, Brewmaster has gotten a tier set that feels impactful and fun to play with, and I think that is a huge plus to the Brewmaster Monk as a potential main character in Season 1 of The War Within. Lastly, let's spend some time talking about how Brewmaster feels to play overall. I think it feels really, really good. This is right up there with Prot Warrior as probably the sturdiest feeling tank, and Brewmaster with stagger and with good cooldown reduction on your purifying brew, with good uptime on your celestial brews, it just feels like it's in a place where it can live almost indefinitely on its own with just minimal outside healing. When I first did some testing, the self-healing from Gift of the Ox Orbs felt really weak, but in this last round of testing that I've done over the last few days, it feels like they've kind of fixed that, and it just feels really, really good to play with. I have a lot of fun playing Brewmaster Monk on the beta right now, and I think that I would have a lot of fun playing it as a main character going into The War Within. I'm not ready to make a decision yet, but Brewmaster is definitely in my top 3 with Prot Warrior and Blood DK. Maybe there's a little bit of a reason for the order that I'm doing these videos in, but overall I have truly enjoyed Brewmaster. I think it's in a fantastic spot, and I'm looking forward to playing it, if not as a main, definitely as an alt. If you made it this far in the video, please consider giving it a like and giving the channel a subscribe. It does really help us out. I still have 3 more tank videos to make before I start working towards making a decision on what's going to be my main, so be on the lookout for those. The Druid video is going to be coming in the next few days. I'm hoping maybe 1 or 2 days after the Monk video comes out, and then we'll be shifting gears towards Vengeance Demon Hunter and Protection Paladin after that as well. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, farewell.